natural body of a particular king, which of course goes through its life cycle and dies. But what survives and what continues is the notion of kingship. And this whole idea of the continuous power of the monarch is absolutely built in to a monument of this sort.
Continuity was key to the royal family as it is today. From Edward the Confessor to Elizabeth I, the Abbey's tombs announced the lasting power of the monarchy. But in the 17th and 18th centuries, England saw massive change in society, politics and religion. The monarchy lost both power and its sacred aura. In the Abbey, there were no new royal tomb monuments built. And instead, we got things like this. Monuments, not to kings and queens, but to writers and musicians, a new elite. With the British Empire expanding, there was a national confidence in our culture. The Abbey, ever at the heart of the establishment, wanted to embrace these new heroes. The need even overcame a few troubling details.
I'd always thought of abbeys as being deeply religious, highly respectable places, but look at this. W.H. Auden, who was gay, George Eliot, who was a woman novelist pretending to be a man, Dylan Thomas, alcoholic, Lord Byron, womanizer, D.H. Lawrence, Lady Chatterley's lover. They're not actually buried here. These are memorials which were placed here long after their death, once the veneer of history had finally made them a little bit more respectable. There is something slightly weird about the fact that so many of these monuments are much more modern than the writers themselves.
Yes, because a lot of people were left out. Byron was too scandalous to include, Shelley was an atheist, Alexander Pope was too Catholic. So to that extent, we are looking at a modern version of the past, and it always has been a modern version of the past.
But why do you seem to have this explosion of poets here in the 18th and 19th century?
I think that's really associated with national confidence. There's this moment where suddenly the idea of displaying in an almost theatrical way the national culture starts up, and you start to put in memorials to people who aren't actually buried here in an effort to display national pride.
So were writers vying for the chance of being buried here?
No. It's very expensive to be buried here. Ben Jonson is buried here, but not in Poets' Corner. He's buried standing up because it was too expensive to be buried lying down.
He's got a tiny little memorial, hasn't he?
He has.
It's my favourite, I think.
There's just a little stone on the top of his head, essentially. But by the 19th century, the Abbey had got so established, or Poets' Corner was so established, that it was felt that if you were a great writer, you should be in here. Quite a lot of great writers didn't want to be in here. So Dickens, for example, expressly refused in his will to be buried here, but he's buried here anyway. Hardy wants to be buried in Dorset. Well, a bit of him is buried in Dorset, but the rest of him is buried up here.
It is quite a jumble, though, isn't it?
I love the way that, unlike Madame Tussauds, nobody gets thrown out. They just get shuffled along or put in a less important place.
It does seem to me to be an incredibly English way of dealing with things. It's quite reassuring in a way, isn't it?
It is. I like it myself.
It wasn't just writers and poets who were embraced by the Abbey, but scientists, explorers, even people I knew. Today, the latest national icon is being commemorated, the Royal Ballet. But while plaques are added, virtually nothing's known about what's under the floor. There are graves of at least 3,000 people below, but no one knows how the burials are structured. So, in the middle of the night, radar is being used to investigate the world of the dead.
So all these black rectangles are burials?
Effectively, yes. What we're looking at here is the plan of the radar data. This is the whole of the south transept. This is the line here of the pillars which you can see in front of you. And what these black rectangles represent is the area of graves buried beneath the surface.
I find that quite extraordinary. There isn't any indication of most of those graves on the floor. There's just ordinary flagstones, yet under here there are these series of what appear to be very large graves.
Yes, well, this is because there's been hundreds of years of burial here in the Poets' Corner, and many of the important burials would have been put into stone or brick-lined chambers that were dug down into the ground, then covered over with a great slab with an inscription on. Now, quite a lot of those slabs have disappeared over the course of time, and we wouldn't know about those chambers or those graves if it were not for the radar.
Is this the first time that this kind of work's been done here?
Yes, I mean, this is something that we're absolutely delighted to have put in hand, and we've got a lot more to do. But this is because this is showing us an awful lot of information that we had no idea of.
I'm not surprised there's practically more people under the floor than there are walking around.
That could be the case.
For 1,000 years, the Abbey has buried so many bodies, it's a chock-full memorial to the people and values of the establishment. No monarchs have been buried at the Abbey since the 18th century, but their kingship lives on through the coronation. Westminster Abbey will one day embrace a new king, and like our current Queen, his body will undergo something extraordinary. The next coronation will see the making of the monarch, the head of state, and the head of the Church of England all in one. And as for hundreds of years, Westminster Abbey will provide the ideal setting. The Queen's coronation in 1953 was a theatrical celebration of the old order. If ever there was an event that used history and tradition as a display of power, this was it.
The Queen now wears a robe that may well be descended from the imperial cloaks of the Byzantine emperors.
7 coaches were even hired from a film company for the big event.
It is a completely unique survival. What is so astonishing about the coronation is that it really goes through a revival in this country in the 20th century, and almost is seen as a kind of riposte, saying, look, you know, we're an old country and we still do these medieval cavalcades and crownings and the rest of it, but in a way we have a stability and a continuity. We haven't had the Russian Revolution. We haven't got Mussolini and the fascists. We haven't got Hitler and Nazis with their rallies. Our ceremonial is about anointing somebody, as it were, under God to represent the nation. I was like sort of looking at the court of Richard II or something like that. It's astonishing, absolutely astonishing.
Receive the rod of equity and mercy.
Judging by past coronations, the next coronation won't just look really historic, but at its core will be things laden with history and symbolism. Since medieval times, this has included anointing with a special oil, the presentation of regalia, and the crowning.
Are these the crown jewels?
No, they're not. And these are actually replicas. They're practice regalia.
What are they used for? Do the little princes come here and practice at night?
No, they're really used for the people who actually have to carry them in procession.
Presumably they're drenched with symbolism.
They are. Every object which is given to the monarch is symbolic in some way of the role of the monarch.
And 2 of these?
2 sceptres. They're kind of wands of office, really, which symbolise the authority.
It's a big stick, isn't it?
It's absolutely, absolutely.
This is interesting, a bird and a spoon.
These are used at the anointing, which is the most solemn part of the ceremony.
This is the oil going over the head of the monarch.
The holy oil which the Archbishop uses to anoint the monarch as a kind of consecrating or setting apart of the monarchy.
Can I pick this up?
You can. It's called the ampulla.
It's a very heavy ampulla.
There's a little hole in the beak which forms a spout, and the oil is poured into the spoon.
They tip the oil in like that.
Right. and from the spoon the Archbishop then anoints the sovereign.
It really just tips it over his head?
No, uses a thumb. It's not actually poured over.
Oh, it's not like vinaigrette.
No.
You put your thumb in like that?
Yeah, you put the thumb and then make the sign of the cross, yeah.
And this. Wow.
And then